60s, and then she leaves home at the age of 16 for various reasons which we'll discuss, and sort of runs away to Bombay uh, to make a life of her own uh, in Bombay as a working woman. And so again, this is a very simplistic explanation of what the book is, but that is the simple arc. She goes and then she comes of age there and she works and she matures there. And needless to say, as a young woman in Bombay, she has many challenges. But another main character in this book is the country itself. And the country, because it is still a young country, so it's almost through this character and her job and her relationships, Rahul tries to show us how this country has also evolved during her lifetime. So that's the beauty of the novel, that it's managed to open up a whole window into a whole country through her and through her relationships, her job, and her family. So we'll talk about more about that. Is there anything you would like to add at the beginning to set the?
At the beginning, I just want to welcome everybody. Thank you so much for coming, and feel free. There are a few empty seats in front. Y'all can just come ahead. Also, for those who are here for the Nepal cooking event, I think that happened yesterday, that session. So please feel free to wander and look at something else. I don't want you to get stuck by mistake in this session. There would be no offense taken whatsoever. Thank you, Shona, for that, setting up this book and what it is about, really. And it's, in addition to all of that, I'll just say it's about thinking of ourselves, each person, as somebody whose life is extraordinarily rich, which has great depth and great meaning, and no less than lives that are seen as extraordinary. You don't have to be the first person to have landed on the moon or climbed Everest or whatever to have this a life which feels so profoundly rich. And sometimes what we look for in literature and novels especially is to recognize this. And you see how meaningful every person's journey through this world is, and how big these challenges feel to ourselves. How our days from the time we wake up are full of anxieties and dreams and ambitions. If we have a small little injury on a finger of our left hand, we wonder about how we clean ourselves on the toilet. Just giving you examples, things that occupy our space, about how a song makes us feel. What is my parents' health condition today? They're suffering something, or my child. This is what literature does. But through this, so we follow this Charu's journey at this kind of at a very close distance, in a way that I hope we'll be able to identify with the character. But this journey, as you pointed out, is through 3 decades of modern India. And we also have a very meaningful relationship with the society around us. Sometimes we don't think about it that much, others do more. Some people are always debating it, like on universities. You must be thinking about what it means to be Assamese, what Assamese nationalism is, what Hindu nationalism, etc., what secularism means. All of these things are matters of active debate, but they are also a texture, part of our lived life. And what gives a country its shape is the kind of relationship we form between our inner selves and the structure of this country. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Billions and billions of these lives forging this relationship between the large and the small, and between one another, most importantly. So the railways gave me one metaphor to kind of explore this. And well, this is what the novel tries to do.
Yeah, so it's sort of always shuttling between the micro and the macro and all the layers in between. And that's what great literature does. It goes into the nooks and crevices of life and shines a light on those nooks and crevices, whether it's in our emotional life, our social lives, or working lives. So Rahul wrote this Sly Company of People Who Care 14 years before this was published. And so I just wanted to ask you. No, I'm not rubbing it in. I just want to know,
No joking.
because it's required tremendous research, and we'll come and talk about it. How you transmute research, actual field work into something that's emotionally powerful like fiction. Because he could have written this as a report. He's also an excellent journalist, so he could have written it as non-fiction. So what I wanted to ask is, how did you get this idea, and how did you, how long did it take for you to have the idea and then figure out what the book is going to be about? A seed of an idea and then
For real song?
for real song.
Okay, so very early I had the idea of, in a country as diverse, and I think it's a really fascinating country to think about how this republic comes together, the projects that we took on in 1947. And it's really interesting to be able to be taught at what is literally a periphery of the country, because we are almost as far east as India goes. And we think about the people of Dibrugarh and the people of Palakkad or Kanyakumari and the people of Kashmir and the people of the Kutch and Saurashtra and the people of all the great cities. How is it that we are forming this nation together? What does this mean?
So that was the last sort of abstract question.
That was the abstract question was how, if I was to consider something, something which an enterprise which gestures at the scale of this country, and if I was to place inside that a mere individual, how would that work out? So I thought of the railways, I thought of the census, but I didn't have the characters. And then I started discovering the character, and discovering her then became the novel. So in that sense, it was very much a process of discovery. I wrote it by hand, the first draft, over several years. Waking up early in the morning was the only time the day I had to work. I had a job. I had our first child had been born. We soon had a second daughter. They are half Assamese. Moy, Okomor Jawai. My wife is Assamese, and that. So with all of this going on. It took me a while to understand the project, and fiction is really something where you need to sit with the idea in a much deeper way than with non-fiction, which is not to say you don't have to sit with it. All writing is hard and it all requires a lot of thought and discipline or obsession at some level. But with fiction, what really works in a novel is how finally it's emotional truth. So all the information you carry, all the ideas that you have, then has to be distilled in something that feels emotionally moving. So, and that is usually done through people, characters, and the bond that the reader forms between the people on the page, so that they start kind of infiltrating your lives and your imagination, uh, not just as a writer but as a reader. In fact, the great writer Richard Flanagan, the Australian writer, said that readers are much more intelligent than writers. Reading, the act of reading is a more intelligent act than the act of writing, because of all, which is very different from several other arts, because of all that you're bringing to create a version of this text. They say nobody reads the same book. So, so for me, it was all just kind of working all of this out, and it took me a full decade after I had the handwritten draft. I revised it, developed it, worked it. You talked about the research. I realized to make the world credible, the world of the Indian Railways, for instance, or many other worlds, the world of Bombay. Which I had some experience of, but not of the period I'm writing. I didn't want to strike false notes in that. So for people who have been in those situations, it should feel like, yes, this feels true, this feels real. It is not someone just making things up on the top of their head. Fiction is not about making things up. It's about how convincing that experience feels.
Right. It's sort of pulling readers into a dream almost, yeah. And I just want to quickly, before I ask him, we talk about how he did the research. I just want to say a little bit about this book. The first book it's set in Guyana, the first fiction, the first novel that he wrote. And he lived there and for a year. And maybe you could just quickly tell them how this was different, or how what this book was about compared to this, and then we'll come back to this.
This is set in the Caribbean. One of the things, actually, Guyana is topographically very similar to Assam. It has the kind of very tropical vibe. You see similar kinds of vegetation. Of course, it doesn't have a winter, which Assam does. Assam is slightly higher up. It has a very interesting, demographically, it's very interesting again, as Assam is. Uh, it was a society which was created as modern Guyana was, as much of the modern Caribbean was created by the colonial enterprise. When they decided now we found a new part of the world, how can we put this part of the world to use for ourselves? Let's start plantations here. Who will work on these plantations? Let's take people from Africa as slaves and we will make them work the plantations. Slavery gets abolished. Now what do? Oh well, we have a new colony in India. Why don't we take Indian workers called coolies? We take them in a kind of new system of slavery called indentured labor, where they have very limited rights under a contract. Across the world, they have no idea where they're going. I mean, sometimes this is migration is terribly interesting. So many Assamese workers now go to Bangalore, say, or Chennai to work, and they have in today's connected age a lot more information about where they're going to. But still, their experiences there are quite interesting to hear about. As I do speak to them when I go to Ohaipuri, which is my sasural. Uh, but think about how it was 150 years ago. You're going across the world, you have no idea where you're going, you don't know what these people are. And then you encounter a society of, say, African freed slaves and some laborers from Portugal. You have the British overlords. And then this becomes a country. It's kind of, it has to it has to make something of itself. There's a lot of friction, there's a lot of creative energy. So this book is an adventure through a society like that, which kind of looks at the frisson of these encounters, what it means to encounter people in this way.
Yeah, it's very, very vivid also because, like he mentioned, the vegetation, you can really see the colors and the architecture, very careful note of, what buildings look like, the fruits,
A lot of the Chinese houses are like the Assamese houses, raised on stilts because of there's so much water. It's like that's another very big similarity in Assam and Guyana. They're full of water. The land of rivers or something we call Guyana. And so you're always having to watch for floods and so architecturally that's very
Yeah.
interesting. The houses on stilts or
yeah, and yeah, so, but this is your own country to some extent.
Yeah.
So, but still you had to do research because our country is a multitude
Yeah.
of worlds. So the story begins in Bihar in a railway town. It's where people work in the railways. It's a center for production of locomotives. So, did you ever grow up as a
No,
child in
I
that, or so? How did you? That you had to do research because he's a journalist. So you had to do research. Right? Did you live there? Did you read up stuff? Did you watch movies? How did you get the information? Because it's very detailed information about even the kind of characters who populate such a town. How do they live? What is their social life?
So the is anyone here a writer or a journalist or studying at whatever level? I don't know the background of the students here. Are you all humanities students mainly, or arts or science, or what you all study? So if you all have done fieldwork projects, uh, what you realize is the most interesting you may have found is the most interesting information you get is sometimes not what you're seeking. It's not necessarily that the questions you're going to ask, but the incidental stuff that you pick up. And that's of great use to the novelist, especially because what you're doing in fiction is you're not trying to tell people what happened, how it happened, why it happened. What you're really trying to get to is what it felt like. And the texture of detail that you need is not easily found. You have to kind of throw yourself into the world. You have to ask a lot of stupid questions, and you have to kind of be willing to feel a little stupid about that, and you have to ask. And sometimes, because of the needs of your story, you ask very esoteric, eccentric questions, and the kinds that say people are in railways, we have never been asked. But some of them quite like it, that, this man is so interested in the life, say, of a welfare inspector, of somebody working in the personal branch. So she's a Charu, we follow her from the age of 3 to the mid-30s. She becomes a railway employee, but she works in the personnel department. She doesn't work with coaches and locomotives and engines and all of that. That allows her and me, the writer, then to explore the stories of people in the Indian railways. Uh, Through that, because it is one of the largest employers in the world, let alone our country, uh, through that we can get a slightly representative idea of Indian life, especially over this long period. Uh, So when I went going around the personnel departments of various places, asking them questions, I remember one officer kind of laughed. अच्छा आप तो back end पे आए हैं. Kind of like nobody comes to research us, and the forms and the rules that the personnel department sits with. But it's also very exciting because when you're a welfare inspector, you're basically like a detective going out into the country, following stories, checking if somebody has faked their, say, education certificate or not. Somebody dies, and then there are three claimants for the job. One wife comes up, a second wife shows up, then the child of a third wife shows up. Who do we give the job to? Multiple wife cases are like terribly interesting. And they're also in the Bombay lingo, they call it like the maximum locha case. Like you don't know what you're getting into. You'll be sent to all parts of the country to like investigate these things. And you're at once, you're straddling, a welfare inspector is straddling two worlds. One is they call the eyes and the ears of the administration. So the railways is kind of, setting you almost as somebody who's keeping watch. But your duty is to guide the employees and their privileges and rights. So you can be on this side and that side. There's a lot of scope for corruption, petty corruption. Who do you give this job to? Who do you give these benefits to? All of that. There's a lot of like exploitation of women. That I will favor you if you favor me, and all of that. Welfare inspectors have bad reputations. Charu is a kind of is a committed and upstanding one. It's a job that very few women do because you may have to leave for some unknown place in the middle of the night. There's been an accident, or somebody sends you there. Through this, we see a lot of adventurous journeys that she undertakes. Say, she goes into the badlands of UP during L.K. Advani's Rath Yatra in the 90s, when the Ram temple movement is kind of really building up. We see another very long expedition into the Deccan, where she's kind of
Telangana,
and where she's basically among the community of sanitation workers. And what was the question? The research. So all of that comes from this commitment then to try and put your characters in situations then which feel authentic and you kind of not.
So you interviewed a lot of welfare inspectors.
I did. See, what the thing about research is, one tip I'll give to any aspiring writers here is there's one thing collecting material, then the other thing for fiction writing especially is to let that material evaporate. So you can't have them sitting in blocks, on the text, I have learned this and let me introduce you. But how can you kind of utilize them? How can you channel them in such a way that they evaporate and they inform the world of the novel? So you're just inside it rather than, and you're not thinking about it, it's just there around you.
Right. You have to steep yourself in that world so that.
Yeah, and then you have to pull yourself out as well. And that's why I see it takes a decade also.
No, I'm not. I mean, you were also in a job, you were parenting, and I mean, I didn't mean to. So also you deconstructed the stuff. You went to these railway town because so her childhood is in this town in Bihar, and then she comes to Bombay and becomes a welfare inspector in the railways. Her father is also in the railways, and also can you just talk about that town, how you deconstructed that, and why she left? Because it was the patriarchal setup there that there was a lot of love in the family, but still she felt oppressed and she left at the age of 16.
So this book begins with a tragedy. She loses her mother, like it's there in the first few pages, so it's not really a spoiler. And then how do you deal with a loss so profound at a young? She's 5 when that happens. They're a family of 3 siblings. She's the middle child, the girl. She has 2 brothers. There's a father, there's a grandmother, there's a second grandmother who's kind of brought in to help raise the children. Um, as she grows up, so one of the things I did a lot of reading about is um, what happens to how do girls in particular respond to the early loss of a mother? Because that is such a deep bond, and you need this somebody to guide you through so many kind of emotion, which is, I think, the life of a woman, as we know, is like much more challenging one than the life of a man, which is the kind of you things come to you as a man, they give it to you, but a woman, you are the one who's constantly having to adjust. You get married, you move into the man's house, you go through bodily changes that men have no idea. You have childbirth. I mean, these are very, very tremendously profound experiences. So to have that mother figure is so important. Now, so two of the ways that when somebody loses their mother early, one is the way they respond. These things can manifest in at different stages of people's lives in different ways. But sometimes girls find that they really need someone to take care of them always because they just, uh, because of that kind of loss and the trauma, they're looking for a mother basically in some form. And then there's another kind of equally, what can I say, characteristic response is that you don't trust anybody to look after you, right? Because you feel like the person who was meant to look after me is no longer there. How can I entrust myself into anything? And I will look after myself always. So your greatest commitment actually just ends up becoming your quest for independence, to be not dependent on anybody, to stand on your own 2 feet. And Charu is very much someone inclined to do that. And as she grows up in this township, which is in many ways a kind of microcosm of India at that time, I mean, of India looking to become self-sufficient. I mean, this is to remind all the younger students here that, the young people here, that Atmanirbharta, self-reliance, was not like something which was just discovered a couple of years ago. It was a endeavor of Indian leaders since independence, and certainly of Nehru's. And so you have an industrial township set around a workshop, very different from conventional ways of Indian life, which is organized uh, uh, along lines of caste, language, community, all of that. This is something profoundly different. In some ways, it's very forward-looking. So someone like Charu's father, who is someone he marries out of caste, who drops his caste name, he's down with this kind of idea of a progressive egalitarian idea. Somebody like Charu's grandmother finds it profoundly alienating. Like, where are we? What does this place even mean? Like, what kind of untethered life is this? So this is something that India has had to deal with. You know how what is our culture? How far are we moving from our culture? What is modernization? What does it mean to be modern Indian? So anyway, in all of this, as Charu's growing up, she realizes that no matter how forward-looking her father is, he doesn't have like really the will and imagination to be to let her be what she needs to. A lot of the domestic responsibilities come on her, and eventually, after a great railway strike, which was one of the kind of profound ruptures in Indian modern history, because it was really the precursor to emergency.
Yes.
And made emergency seem almost inevitable. Charu gets on a train across days and nights on unreserved compartment, runs away to Bombay, arrives in Bombay, where people always kind of somehow reach to in order to rediscover, reimagine themselves, make something of themselves, and then that's where the next set of adventures takes her.
And so there was some instinct that she had to run away to this place.
Yeah, I mean, it is like a motif in her life, and it is something that marks her life. Escape can be very meaningful also, because it's also it is not always running away, it's also the idea of trying to become something. There is, I think, beneath the idea of escape, often a noble impulse.
Yeah. I think even in this, I think here when you say that you went to Guyana for 1 year.
Yeah.
You said you're running away from everything.
Yeah.
The character, I mean, he also spent a year there, but it's fiction. So the main character also says I ran away from everything that was familiar in India to this. So
That's right. It is a preoccupation.
Yeah. So let's see now. So Charu comes to Bombay, and then she becomes a welfare inspector. The thing is, you have two daughters, and I'm sure you're married. You have lots of women in your life, but she comes from a particular age, like you said, 60s, and you've really got so deep into her emotional life. Um, I want to understand how you managed to get into the head of a woman of that generation. And I don't believe in this whole thing of appropriation that man cannot write about a woman cannot write. Of course you can, but it's so convincing. So I want to know what did it is it from your life experience, or did you also have to interview people, or yeah.
So I mean, life experience, yes, in the sense that to a degree, I've lived a lot of my life only among women because I lost my father when I was 16, and so I grew up with my mother and my sister in Bombay. Then I live now with my two daughters and my wife. So when we all get together, there's basically three generations of women and me. My wife is also one of two sisters. So I guess the idea of writing or thinking women wasn't like fantastically creative or anything to me. It seemed natural enough for me to be able to do it without the idea that I'm doing this project. I'm a man writing a woman, and this is what I'm trying to do. Uh, but I think it's not sufficient. As a man, you still receive the world in a way that is actually quite limited. And men, I mean, one thing that fathering taught me is like how basic boys are. And because young girls are like just much more interesting, they're just much more emotionally attuned to the world. They are, and when I see like them with their cousins and I hear stories about myself as a child, boys are dolls. Basically, they just throw stuff around, they have energy to expend, and you finish your energy and you're done. You kind of like a clock. They have very little actually going on.
Yeah.
So that is something
Because
like
they can take their position for granted. I mean, they can take the
Exactly.
entitlement for granted.
so everything is done now.
Yeah.
Like whatever people will come, they'll feed you.
Yeah.
You make sure you have more food than the girl. You make sure whatever.
Yeah.
At all those levels, you're not required to actually. You're not even required to kind of instinctively question yourself even. So maybe some of that observation kicked in. But I think as a writer, I mean, I'll say, growing up, it was by default I would read male authors. This was not a choice I made, it just happened. And when I thought about this, it was true. I remember one of my friends, she's a writer, Kamala Shamsi, wrote this kind of provocation 10 years ago. That why don't we do a year of, we have Tatika here, a publisher. Tatika, I don't know if you remember, she wrote this piece. Why don't we do a year of just publishing only women? Just so that more men especially are able to read women writing. And I thought this is actually true. Without knowing it, so much of my reading has skewed towards me. So I made it a point to then start reading women across all kinds of genres in all the languages that were available to me. Uh, and to really imbibe, to feel that, to get the confidence to be able to articulate a female I can't say voice exactly because this book does break into first person a couple of times, but it's the third person narrative. But to be able to inhabit her consciousness with some confidence. I mean, this is true not just for women. If you're writing any character and you're following them as closely as I have Charu, you would have to do some kind of reading to inhabit their consciousness. If they do a certain kind of work or there's a certain kind of linguistic community. If I'm writing about even an Assamese boy my age, I would have to do a lot more reading to be able to get into his head, right? Then
Right,
yeah. In fact, even if I'm writing just as myself, I'm putting the act of putting something on the page takes you into a space which is very different from your living life.
Right.
So so I don't think I kind of relied on my living among women as the thing. I feel like I I worked as diligently as I could to be able to assume her consciousness.
Yeah, that's great. Today morning on my feed on my phone, I got this article from this literary magazine called Literary Hub, saying that fiction writers should not rely only on their imagination and experience and need to do field work. I'm like, this is some kind of AI has taken this to another level. Why am I getting this on my feed on the day I'm interviewing him? But anyway, so also Charu, okay, so there's one part of her that wants to be economically independent, wants to do something. She's also fascinated by the country. She's
Yeah.
fascinated by the country, and but then so that's part of it. And also she has all this relationship with men. So that's the other part of her side that she explores in
Yeah.
and and the, and it's constantly her working life and her romantic life are all constantly in tension. So could you just talk a little bit about that? And finally, she does get married, and she lives in a chawl, typical chawl. Tell them about the chawl in Bombay. Yeah.
Well, I just say about work and love. I mean, what is if if, if any man kind of pays attention to a woman's life, you realize that uh, you really have to fight for the right to work and to love. It is not something that a woman can take for granted. Uh, this remains true even now. In fact, the female participation in the workforce is lower than it was in the 1970s, which was the breakthrough decade where women really started kind of agitating and organizing and fighting for their rights to work. Charu is one of those kind of millions, like fictional character who kind of entered that stream. But even so, when she first starts working, she conceals it, she hides it, because she knows she's going to get into trouble with her guardians. Uh, there's a scene, in fact, when her brother comes visiting Bombay, and this guy's a qualified engineer, and Kolkata at that stage in the 1970s is hard to get a job. So he's pretending that he's come to Bombay, but he's turning down all these jobs that she's not getting. And so he's hiding the fact in the sense that he can't get a job, and she has a job, and she's hiding the fact that she does have a job. And then they have to pay a bill at the restaurant, and he's the man, he's older, so it should be his, like I mentioned. She prevails on him to like let him pay it. So he, after moment of hesitation, he allows her, but he said, but don't tell the mama about it, don't tell the people we're living with. So not only is she hiding, not only is she working, she's hiding it, and then she has to kind of keep the man's honor. And similarly, with love, a woman's decision to love or the fact that marriage happens is then becomes is a matter of honor. Is it permitted? Sorry. Does society accept this match? Are you allowed to be in a union? I think it's basically monitoring at all levels. You won't go into a working women's hostel as Charu does living there. You're guided by like these unlimited rules. I mean, these are working women who are supposed to be in charge of their lives. But you can't comb your hair in this room. You cannot chat with males near the compound. You cannot have extra friendship with staff or whatever it is. But we kind of really infantilize women. And
Right.
so, yeah.
And then finally, she does get married. So she has a lot of romantic liaisons. And then finally, she gets married and she lives with her husband's family in this classic Bombay housing arrangement called the Chawl. And we can talk about
Bombay
that.
films of a certain era will probably get them because I just wondered, since we're running out of time, I wonder if we should talk
Can we
about.
just have two more questions? This and another question because I want to ask about the language question.
Yeah, I actually
That's
thought
very important.
maybe we could talk about identity and Assam.
Okay, sure.
So,
Sure. Why don't you?
how long do we have?
It's 12:45. Can we
Sure.
take 5 more minutes to discuss and then open it to a Q&A? Yeah, so
Yeah.
maybe you can talk about yeah.
So we were just sort of chatting about the themes in the book that might be interesting to you. And in this, I told her then about my Assamese connection, which is my wife is Assamese. And then I was telling her that the longest piece of journalism actually ever done in my life is set in Assam. It was 16,000 words. At some point, I even thought about making it a book. It was set in a riot which I followed for 4 years. This is 2012. Do you remember the Boro and Bengali Muslim riots? It displaced a great number of people. And the reason it kind of ties in with this book, because one of the recurring motifs in this book is the census. And the census, actually, it comes in every 10 years, and Charu herself becomes a census enumerator. Uh, it allows for several things, but one of the things it allows us to think about is identity and what it means for so many types of Indians living under this country, what it means to be a type among other types, what it means also to be an individual among so many individuals, because as we know, we have the most number of individuals in the world as well, 1.5 billion over there.
Also,
So-
one thing that the census questions.
Yeah.
There's so much diversity. The diversity is so complex, and the census, the first one that the British did in 1871, it evolved from there.
Yeah.
To some extent, just the counting actually and the categories flatten the diversity, right? Like there's a
I mean, it's very interesting
Yeah.
how the counting of people and the categorization of people is a very important thing. And I think especially people in Assam are probably alive to it, and it's worth thinking about who is it that you count, who don't you count, when you categorize people, who is it that you include, who is it that you leave out. When we think about the NRC and the CA and the chronology समझते हैं, when you first have a population register, from there you identify the citizens, who's a citizen, then you give certain non-citizens easy access to become citizens, you leave out certain people. This is the weaponization of counting in a sense.
Yes.
And then it kind of makes you wonder, are we merely our identities? Is that all there is to me? Some of us have very complex identities. I, for example, am mixed Bengali and Gujarati, was born in Bombay, had a childhood in Secunderabad, now lives in Delhi, has lived most of my life in Bombay, otherwise has an Assamese wife. So I'm a bit like in Indian Railways, but even people not like me, like whose identity is very straightforward, I'm so and so from so and so community, whatever. I'm a Guru who has lived all my life in Pukajhawan and whatever, and I practice Taoism. Even then, there is something beyond inside us which is much beyond these parameters, right? About our mind, our hearts, our consciousness, our relationship with people of other communities. These can't be really categorized. You can't put them in columns. Are they not worthy? Are they not then? Do they not constitute the idea of this country? So in Assam, it's so fascinating because the Northeast has at least 275 ethnicities. We checked this figure with Sanjay Hazarika a couple of months ago. He said, yeah, you would not be wrong if you think that. And Assam, when I was researching this very long piece on the riots, has had immigration, waves and waves of immigration. Where did the Boro Kosaris initially come from? Were they indigenous? Did they come from southern Tibet, China, whatever? There are various theories. We have the Taya homes, which came from Southeast Asia. Throughout the 20th century, it has had a great amount of immigration. When I read somewhere, I think only second to Brazil in the 20th century. So we had, say, the Hindi speakers, people setting up shop. We had the Adivasis, people who the British called the tea tribes. 90 or 100 of different tribes, put under this label, working the cha bagan. We had Bengali speakers. In this, we had various tribes within Assam. So when I was researching the riot, which was between the Boros and the Bengali-speaking Muslims, it was not even very clear on what axis this riot is progressing on. But sometimes it was like Boros versus non-Boros, because they have tribals versus non-tribals, because they have special rights in the Boro land districts. Is it Muslims versus non-Muslims? Because is it Bengali speakers and non-Bengali speakers? There were so many kind of parameters depending on which part and who you speak to. What was the Assam agitation in the 70s was basically an Assamese nationalism. It was what we see now in Sam in the 2010s is, or 2020s, is something which is morphing closer to the mainland idea of Hindu nationalism. So all of these ideas are really interesting. And I remember there was on one of my reporting trips when I was traveling back from on the passenger from Lower Assam to Guwahati. I think if anyone from Lower Assam here, anyway, this, I think it was okay. Do you know Boko, small place? So near Boko, suddenly the train stopped near Paddy Fields, and we know passenger trains stop everywhere, but still this seemed like this is not the place where we should be stopping for so long. Eventually, I got out to see what's happening there, and then there was the auto rickshaw which was kind of laying mangled on the tracks, and then there were three male bodies laid down by the tracks. You know, they're covered up, two bandaged, two. One was like in a very bad state. The wife of one man came and she was in kind of shock and she kind of slapped him to seize awake and she was so angry with him for being so stupid and you know. Anyway, so it was, you watched all of that. 1 or 2 days later, I saw in the newspaper that the three men in that auto were, one was a Guru name, one was a Muslim name, and one was a Rama name. And so that, I mean, I think the line I had in the piece is that these deaths need not be demographized because they're not riot deaths. But even so, it's kind of so symbolic. It reminded me of this, the great Rahat Indori poem, Hindustan Sita Baap Ka Thodi Hai. There is the line that, I pulled it out actually before the session. So let me say it because I feel it's relevant to this discussion. लगेगी आग तो आएंगे घर कई जल्द यहाँ पे सिर्फ हमारा मकान थोड़ी है. So when the fire burns, you know, we're all going to burn. So when we have inflammatory identity politics, this is something we have to be very mindful about. Your house may not be spared, your village may not be spared, fire spreads.
Yeah, I just want to ask one quick question about his writing. See, when when Indian writers write in English, there's always this major problem, which is that often you're writing about people who are not speaking in English, and that's very true of his book because it was in, it was set in Bihar, so they're either speaking Bangla or they're speaking one of either Bhojpuri, I assume, Santali, because they were in Bihar, and then in Bombay they're speaking Marathi, they're speaking Gujarati, and they're speaking Bombaya Hindi. So this whole, there's a whole challenge of how do you convey the cadences of the Indian language and the idiosyncrasies in, and he has tried to do it, which is why I'm trying to ask him. Was that something that you thought about consciously?
Yeah, I find language very interesting and the challenge of reproducing on the page, which is very difficult, but how do you surmount these challenges? So this Sly Company is written in a kind of, a lot of the narrative is in a Guyanese inflected English, which is a kind of Creole Patois tongue. It is a mix of, it's a language of, born out of the encounters I spoke about a little earlier. I remember when I went to the kind of Hindi heartland where a lot of the Indian laborers were transported from, and I was telling them about that. They were like, "Acha, to wahan khichdi paki hai." And this is also, that language is actually a very delicious, interesting khichdi.
And there's one thing here of the Dulian. There's an ad for Dulian, like a bride, but it's actually an African. But it's Dulian. It's like it's written. There's an ad, but with an African-looking face.
Right.
And there's a whole controversy. There's a controversy because the ad is for a Dulian, but then they say, but it's not a coolie, it's an African. But anyway, that's another side. But here the Indian languages.
Yeah, so I mean, you know, the qualitative difference in this is over here. I really think of this as actually a multilingual book written in English, because I know in some ways this is a big claim to make, but this was honestly like part of my project. Because so much of this novel is set in the non-English speaking world, or among people for whom English is not a first language. So we have the Bengali house, we have the various Bombay languages that she spoke about, we have Gujarati areas, we have Marathi. Yeah, but I needed a language, a base language, a narrative which is a kind of transparent enough to absorb all of this. Right? Which is different, where in this Creolese is the kind of provides its own narrative kind of the thread. But over here, I needed something a little more transparent, which can absorb these various languages that exist in India, and more to the point, the various languages that are part of the world of this novel. Uh, the difficulty in this, the technical difficulty is like unlike in films where you can have people talk as they do and then you can subtitle them. To do that over here is terribly tedious. You know, you read and then you see in brackets what this reads like in English, the translation reads badly or whatever. So we just have to suggest it. You kind of even so, there are a lot of words over here which are foreign words. So when we had the audiobook for this reading, it was done out of England by a Indian or British Indian of Indian origin. And she said, can we have a half an hour call to just discuss all the other words, which are not standard English, but Bengali words, Marathi words, etc. And I said, yes, of course, we must. I had in fact offered it, because I wanted those words to be pronounced right. And then that became 3 calls of 2 hours each, because that's how many words we found there were. And I didn't realize this, and somebody asked, is this going to be the version actually just published abroad as well? And I said, yes. And so it may be, but it just felt like I wanted to write a novel which feels authentic to the world of India, even though it is in English. I mean,
So that's and then I just have one small question. There's one writer which says, I really dislike writing, but I love having written. It's a struggle. So do you like writing? I mean, do you like the process of writing, or is it up and down, or just quickly if you can address that and throw it over?
I thought I didn't like writing, but I realized I don't like having written more. So it's worse to having written than writing. So once I realized that, actually writing was quite fun, because having written means that A, you can't do anything about it, it's already written out there, and B, that people are going to think about it and maybe tell you about it, which is fine. I actually find that I do like interacting with readers as well, but it makes you, it's out of your hands anymore. It's no longer between you and the text.
Right.
This book now belongs to anybody who reads it. So writing is hard, but it's also very joyous. It's very meaningful. I encourage anybody who's interested in writing to do so. Read in as many languages as you can. Practice writing in as many languages as you can. It's a very kind of full engagement with the world. Your mind, your heart, your body, all of it is kind of so into it. Sometimes when I write, sometimes sentences course to me, like they stay with me, and then when I think about them at night, it's very fulfilling in that way. It's very giving. It also kind of lands you a bit of, gives you more anxiety than other things could possibly. But it's nice. It's meaningful.
Wonderful. So on that note, we can open to question and answer. Yeah, there's a person.
Hi.
Yeah. So my question is.
Oh, is this mic for them? Sorry, is this floating mic?
Hello. Hi, sir.
Hi.
Good afternoon.
Hi. We met briefly, in the washroom.
Sir, my question is, what is the differences between fiction and non-fiction? And your writing is reflected women empowerment and striving of women. So how you can inspire and writing? And one question is, you say already mentioned about in this session. So fiction is you can say feeling. It's not imagination. So you can just elaborate this topic, sir. That's it, sir.
The first one was what? The difference between fiction and non-fiction?
Yes.
Well, the greatest difference, I think, is that it doesn't matter what you write in fiction, but it has to feel convincing. Whereas non-fiction may or may not have that emotional power on you, but what you put into that is terribly important. So there's a kind of emotional texture behind whatever it is you're writing in fiction, and that has to really kind of burst through. Yeah, and a lot of work has to go into that, to making it work. Like why would I read just a story that is coming to your mind? I have to recognize something of myself and the world in that. Yeah. The woman character, I think we spoke about, right?
Yeah.
Uh, yeah,
So there's also
That's
literary non-fiction which tries to do the same thing as fiction.
of course, it does, but it's anchored in
It's
something.
anchored. It's anchored in
yeah.
facts. Yeah. It's anchored in facts. Yeah.
I mean, just think about how magical it is, but how difficult it must be, as in to use nothing but words which are just kind of small squiggles on the page to then transmit to a reader a whole world. You have no sound, you don't have any kind of visual clues of any kind. Uh, how much work must have to go on to make this thing come off the page and take over your mind? Yeah. Thank you, sir. Uh, anyone else?
What else?
Oh,
Kartika is
God.
there.
I'm almost worried.
Only because nobody else is asking. Now I would have asked you away elsewhere. But I'm curious, once Charu's put to bed in a way, and the book is over, and I mean, it's like people as well, it's like me. What happens to characters after they finished and on off the page now for you? What happens to them in your head?
I mean, it's in everybody else's heads, whoever like happens to read the book, it's in their heads. Uh, it's interesting actually because suddenly the book comes out and then the character takes on a whole new life. So even when the writer is thinking about this as a character, people tell you, I like this about her, or I felt this about her. And then she's kind of almost transforming into something then now, which is made up of various things the readers think about her. Some people think about her as overtly rebellious, some people think about her as quietly analytical, or whatever it is. Um, One of the things I realize is then she has taken on a life which is in some ways separate from the book. Like there are people for whom Real Song, the novel, means something, but there are some for whom Charu, the character, means something which is kind of outside the confines of the book. Then you know what I mean? As a character, then kind of escapes the pages in which the author put her. I'm finding that interesting as well. Sorry, this is perhaps not a very satisfying answer, Kartika. I think we're done.
Is there anyone else? Do we have time, or where is Rajni? Is it the session is, yeah, okay. Yeah, it's 1:05. Okay.
So thank you to our panelists for such an illuminating exchange of dialogues that we had. And whatever we have witnessed today is not merely a dialogue, but an exploration of memory, narrative responsibility, artistic devotion, and the many forms a storytelling can take. So through journalism, biography, and fiction, we are reminded that literature allows us to listen more carefully to histories, to silence, and to each other. So on behalf of Duilf University and Duilf University International Literature Festival, so I extend my heartfelt gratitude to Rahul sir for sharing his insights, and also to Suvana ma'am for guiding this conversation with such a thoughtfulness and depth. And also thank you to our audience for being such an attentive listener. So I hope that with this session, it inspires deeper discussion in the near future. So thank you and have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Somaya, very much. Thank you all for coming. And yeah, well, I don't think anyone fell asleep, which is always encouraging. And thank you especially for those people who came for the Nepali cooking session but stayed on regardless. You all are noble. But
We had a lovely session, sir.
All right, thank you.
We thoroughly enjoyed.
All right. I'm sorry. Thank you.